impartial. But it is definitely not impartial as between these two theories. The Commission began its work simply by assuming the truth of the official theory. It did not argue for that theory. It simply assumed its truth from the outset and throughout its work. And it uses this theory to decide which events are relevant. We're also told in the preface that they intended their work to be independent and nonpartisan. Now, by nonpartisan, they meant that the committee was made up equally of Democrats and Republicans. Even this claim isn't quite true, because the chairman of the commission is a Republican, and even more importantly, the executive director is a Republican. And this executive director, Philip Zelikow, is not just any old Republican. He was a member of the National Security Council of the Bush I administration, where he worked with Condoleezza Rice. Then, during the Clinton years, when the Republicans were out of office, he and Condoleezza Rice co-authored a book. And I have co-authored a book with somebody, and I know you have to be very good friends and you have to share almost all beliefs in common. He then worked for the transition team for the National Security Council for the transition between the Clinton and Bush administrations. And finally then, he was appointed to Bush's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board. So, the Commission is definitely not independent, if you mean independent from the White House, because the executive director represents the perspective of the White House. Now, why is this important? The executive director directed the work of the staff, and the staff of the commission, not the commissioners, did almost all the work. And as director of the staff, he decided which lines of inquiry were worthy to be looked into, which subjects should be subject to research, and which ones should not. Therefore, as executive director, Zelikow could direct the staff to investigate those events that were relevant to the official conspiracy theory and simply ignore all events that would be supportive of the alternative conspiracy theory. Some critics, having read the 9/11 Commission report from the perspective of the alternative theory, have called it the 9/11 Omission Report. Well, this is a good name because it systematically excludes virtually every fact supporting the alternative theory. But given Zelikow's role, this should be no surprise to us. Some people have also called it a whitewash, and it is. But this term assumes that the Commission should have investigated the White House, that is, various kinds of evidence suggesting that there was complicity by the White House. But given Zelikow's position, any investigation of the White House would have been carried out by, essentially, the White House itself. A more accurate way to put it was that as the White House's inside man on the Commission, Zelikow was in position to make sure that the White House, along with the CIA, the FBI, the Pentagon, and the Justice Department, was not investigated. Once we understand this, we will not be surprised by the Commission's omissions.
Christina Borgeson is the author of Into the Buzzsaw, Leading Journalists Expose the Myth of a Free Press, a collection of stories about reporters who acted courageously and discovered that no good deed goes unpunished. She's won an Emmy and a Murrow Award for investigative reporting. Christopher Scheer is the co-author of The 5 Biggest Lies Bush Told Us About Iraq. He co-authored the Oscar-nominated script for the film Nixon. Paul Thompson has compiled the world's most compendious resource of mainstream press stories about the events of 9/11, the complete 9/11 timeline, at cooperativeresearch.org. Finally, Dr. Robert Bowman, an old friend of mine, by the way, a man who flew 101 combat missions as a fighter pilot in Vietnam, and who today takes a stand against war. He headed the Star Wars programs under Ford and Carter and then opposed them under Reagan. He now heads the Institute for Space and Security Studies. Welcome, everyone. Let me start with Dr. Bowman. What is your assessment of the film clip about the Project for a New American Century that we just saw? Do these guys really have that much influence?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, this bunch not only drew up a plan for the foreign policy of the United States, they also drew up a plan for the foreign policy of Sharon's Likud government of Israel. Both of these plans, drawn up by largely the same people, included regime change in Iraq as a central element. And as the clip noted, they acknowledged it couldn't happen. The American people wouldn't allow it unless there was a new Pearl Harbor. And that is what 9/11 was.
If I could clarify, he's referring to a paper that came out in 1996 called A Clean Break, which was written for Benjamin Netanyahu, the just newly elected Israeli prime minister, and it's written by, I believe, Douglas Feith and a number of the people who are lately involved in this Israeli spy scandal. So David Wormser is another one. So that these, the neocons, we refer to them, actually gave advice to Sharon and also pretty much the same people in the Project for the New American Century.
Paul, what about 9/11? Why is anyone doubting it? Weren't all the real questions cleared up by the 9/11 Commission?
We can see so many instances of conflicts of interest. For instance, Philip Zelikow, who is the executive director, and he was the person who is in charge of figuring out who the witnesses are going to be, where the evidence, and what evidence they were going to look at. He co-wrote a book with Condoleezza Rice, the national security advisor, and has so many ties with the Bush administration. He was part of the transition team, so he actually had to be interviewed by his own commission because he himself was involved in so much of what went on before 9/11. And all of the commissioners are very compromised by conflicts of interest. Quite a few of them are working with legal teams that represent United Airlines or American Airlines. I think half the commissioners. So that's one problem. Another problem is that the final report was supposed to be a unanimous report. So that means that if there was a single commissioner who had any objection about anything, that fact would be dropped from the report. So there is literally nothing in the 9/11 report that the Bush administration did not approve of.
The number of omissions is staggering. For example, they begin the book with a discussion of the hijackers, giving the same 19 that have been named from the beginning. They fail to point out that 6 of those hijackers have shown up alive. They also discuss Muhammad Atta, describing him as a fanatic Muslim, obviously so devout he was ready to meet his maker. They omit the fact, as Daniel Hupsicker has revealed, that Atta was very fond of alcohol, pork, and lap dances. They hardly discuss the World Trade Center collapses. They do not discuss the fact that fire has never brought down a high-rise steel frame building. They do not discuss the fact that the collapse